How do you as a leader lead others, lead other leaders, and lead a department? What are the differences in the three? How do we structure our teams? How do we onboard new leaders? How do you build an intentional system to multiply leaders throughout your entire church? All that and more on this week's podcast. Let's do it.
This is the definitive podcast for helping you plan, create, and execute dynamic worship experiences at your church. Useful, practical content in the areas of production, worship, communications, first impressions, and more. This is Making Sunday Happen.
Hey guys, welcome to the podcast. Thanks so much for being here. Hope your year has started off very well. Mine kicked off very quickly in that we went to Children's Pastors Conference, CPC, with our partners at Seeds Family Worship. Had a great event there. I was able to be a coach at that event and work with several kids leaders and kids directors. And we just love meeting you guys. And I'll tell you a quick story. So we had a lady who is a customer of 1230 Kids, who's one of our subscribers. Her name is Jody Slongo, and she is a kids leader, kids director at a church. And she came with us to help support our booth and be there and worked with us there. So I just love the fact that the people that we serve are not customers so far away. You guys are friends of ours. We're partners together in ministry, so much so that we can go and do an event together and work side by side together. So I just love the fact that Jody came with us to CPC. And we just love meeting new people, love serving the church. You're going to hear a little bit of that today, a little bit of our heart behind the team. So thank you so much for stopping by. And so that was kind of the first part of January. And then last week I turned the big 40. So I turned 40 last week, and my family took me on a little weekend getaway, much needed this past weekend. So we had a blast there. So it's been a crazy January for me, and I'm sure if you're anything like me, you've jumped in full swing back into ministry. So it's just it's a pleasure jumping back into a new year. So I hope your new year is going off very well so far as well. Well, this week's episode of the podcast is brought to you by the Multiply Group. If you feel the weight of not having enough leaders or don't have an intentional strategy to develop leaders, the Multiply Group is a great solution for your church. And today on the show, I welcome Mac Lake, who is the founder of the Multiply Group. Mac and I have known each other for a number of years. He's an incredible leader himself and is well known among pastors and church planters in helping leaders lead. And through his e-courses, books, workshops, and consulting, he's helped many become better leaders. So I'm going to share a quick 2-minute video of Mac answering the question, why am I developing leaders? What's the point of developing leaders? And then we'll jump right into my interview with Mac. So check this out, and I'll be back a little bit later to wrap things up.
When I'm working with the church, helping them build out their leadership development pipeline, one of the very first things I like to address with them is their motivation for developing leaders. So I always talk to them about this question, why are you developing leaders? You know, there's only two answers to that question if you think about it. The first answer is, well, hey, that's a stupid question. The reason we're developing leaders is we don't have enough of them. You know, there's so much stuff to be done that our staff is stressed out, we're overworked, we're working too many hours, we can't accomplish our mission because we don't have enough leaders. But here's the problem. When that's the answer to the question, then what you're going to do is you're going to have a start, stop approach to leadership development. When you don't have enough leaders, you're going to focus on leadership development. But when you have enough, you're not going to focus on leadership development. And so when that's the answer to the question, your primary motivation for developing leaders is your pain. And so that's why you have a start, stop approach to leadership development. But there's a second answer to the question. The reason I'm developing leaders is not my pain, it's their potential. I mean, when I look at people around our organization, I see so much potential in leaders and potential in people that it changes the whole conversation. I want to talk to them about their gifts and their strengths and their passion and their calling. I mean, the whole reason I'm doing leadership development is because of what I see in other people. And when that's your motivation, you're being driven by their potential, not your pain. And now leadership development becomes a natural part of your discipline and your week, not a necessary evil once a quarter when it's time to recruit new leaders. So that's got to be our motivation for developing leaders. It's other people's potential. Hey, let me leave you with this question. Would you still do leadership development if every position in your organization was already filled? It's a very telling question, or at least your answer to that is a very telling answer. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you in next week's video.
Hey guys, today I welcome Mac Lake. Mac is an author and leadership coach. His work has been very influential in the world of church planting and church multiplication. He's the author of The Multiplication Effect, Building a Leadership Pipeline that Solves Your Leadership Shortage. Mac, welcome, man. Thanks for hanging out, dude.
Oh, man, thank you for the invite, and it's so good to see you again, Carl.
Yeah, man. So you got the goatee going on. I can't look as cool as you. It's just not going to happen.
I can't grow the hair up here anymore, so I got to grow it somewhere.
That's right. Well, man, I've known you for years. We've kind of served in the same churches and kind of the same circles together. Yep. But let's walk through your ministry life a little bit. The last few years for those who may not know you. Kind of walk through your story a little bit.
Yeah, sure thing. When I went to when I first got passionate about ministry, I went to Moody Bible Institute, graduated there, and then went to a short stint in youth ministry in Charleston, South Carolina. Went to Dallas Theological Seminary after that. And then that's when I started my full-time work in the church. And so I was an associate pastor in Pawleys Island, South Carolina. Planted a church out of that church. They sent me to plant a church in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina.
Suffering for Jesus at the beach, baby.
Suffering for Jesus at the beach. Yep. And so then I ended up from there, I turned the church over to my associate pastor, and who had been with me for 5 or 6 years. And so I ended up at Seacoast Church doing leadership development there. Yeah. And it was my 7th year there. I met Brian Bloy, who was wanting to start a church planting network. So I joined forces with him, and we started Launch Network. Mm-hmm. And then that the North American Mission Board got a strong interest in that. So we ended up giving that over to North American Mission Board, which is what is their SIM network strategy today. And so I did that for several years, and then said, hey, I need to start my own company. I want to moved to where my grandkids are. So I moved back to Charleston and started Multiply Group when I moved here.
Yeah, that's awesome. So did you change how did it work? Did you change the name of Launch Network to Multiply Group and then give it away, or how did that work?
Yeah, we did. That's a little confusing. We started as Launch Network, and then we pivoted. And so instead of becoming a network, we had so many people who want different denominations and networks that wanted our assessment and wanted our training, that we pivoted. We changed our name to Multiply Group, and we started serving multiple denominations and networks with the assessment and training. And when we gave it over to North American Mission Board, obviously they put their name on it. So I retained the rights to the name Multiply Group. And when I started my own company, I was trying to come up with a name, and I was like, I love Multiply Group, and I got the rights to it. So we relaunched it, but its primary focus is not church planting. It's leadership development that results in church planting. But that's what we do today.
Gotcha. So you spend your days now coaching and training leaders, taking them through courses and processes, right? What does your days look like now?
Yeah, I created a leadership pipeline framework. It's an intentional process that helps churches develop leaders. And whenever you ask, and I do this all the time, I ask pastors, what is your leadership development strategy? They look at me and go, I don't have one, or they'll say theirs is organic, which means they don't have one,
Right.
And so what I do is I come alongside them either on site, or now we have an e-course, a Leadership Pipeline e-course. So we'll come alongside them, me or one of my coaches, certified coaches, will come alongside them and walk them through the process to help their staff and their team build an intentional leadership development strategy so they can have more and better leaders.
So I want to walk through some of that. I want to ask you a question based on that first, but we're going to walk through some of that today. To do this in 30, 45 minutes, you've written books on this, courses on this. So this is going to be kind of a flyby of
Sure.
some of the leadership pipeline stuff. But so with Multiply Group, what are some of the biggest accomplishments that you maybe are most proud of? Maybe some of the leaders that have gone through churches that you've served. What is kind of some big highlights of the ministry?
Yeah. First time I ever taught the Leadership Pipeline framework, it was an experiment. And I did it at Chick-fil-A headquarters, and 5 churches and 9 Chick-fil-A operators came and sat through it. And one of those churches was Pastor Sean Sears in Boston, Massachusetts. And Sean is church planter, big time leader. He took a hold of this and he loved it. And so after that, I did it in the 2-day workshop at that point. And after that workshop, he would FaceTime me. And when he would FaceTime me, his team would be standing around a whiteboard. They would have the Leadership Pipeline up there, and they would just fire questions at me, and they were gobbling it up. Brian Buford is on his team, and Brian became passionate about this and began to teach it to other churches. But that church, I don't know, they were running 500, something like that at the time. They have grown. They now have multi-sites. They plant churches like crazy, and they've truly become a multiplying church. And, Sean just loves this Leadership Pipeline framework. And so that was one of the first churches that ever went through. So I'm really proud of that. And then the other thing that primarily during COVID, I wrote the Discipling Leaders book series. And because I saw churches struggling, they just don't have resources to disciple leaders. They've got resources to disciple new believers and young believers, but no intentional resources geared towards discipling leaders. So I wrote that book series, and just hearing the testimonies from people who go through that in micro groups, which is what I recommend, 1 to 3 type of thing. And I get stories every week on that, and I love those.
Man, that's awesome. All right, so let's hit on some Leadership Pipeline stuff, and I want to get to just kind of what you've seen through COVID, if churches are doing anything different, or kind of a temperature check there from you. But let's start kind of diving into some content. So with that in mind, why are you so passionate about helping leaders? You've been doing this a long time. What is still driving you? What's your why?
Yeah, I was saved at 9 years old in a little country church in West Virginia. High attendance would have been 70. And I just developed a passion for Christ early on in my life, and a passion for the church. But there was a big problem. I was extremely shy. Couldn't look people in the eye, wouldn't talk to people, cross the road when a girl's coming, that sort of thing. And I wanted to serve the church. I wanted to serve Christ with all my heart. And so I ended up going to Moody Bible Institute. I got into youth ministry after that. And a group of parents approached me and said, "Mac, we love you. You're a nice guy. You're just not a leader." And that hurt, but it was true. I moved to Dallas, go to Dallas Seminary, which I loved. But the biggest impact in Dallas was a pastor who came alongside of me, saw something in me, some reason, and he began to disciple me in leadership. And I saw the radical transformation. I call it a conversion. I had a conversion from being a doer to a leader. I had been in leadership positions, but I was a doer. I wasn't leading a team. I wasn't leading people. I was just doing it. Had people around me doing some tasks, but I really wasn't leading. And so that conversion gave me a conviction. And anytime I see staff members or anybody that's struggling, just being a doer, they're stuck in that doer, it immediately tells me they've never had a leadership development conversion because they're not demonstrating a conviction. I had a conversion. I gave my life to Christ at 9. I'm passionate about Christ. I love sharing Christ with lost people. All right. And the same with, I had a leadership development conversion, and I love discipling leaders. And so that's where that passion comes from.
Is everybody a leader? Can leadership be taught? Are you born with that quality? Are there some that just want to be doers and stay doers?
Yeah, I think some people say everybody's a leader, and everybody has influence, but I don't think everybody's a leader. And so I sort of disagree with that statement that everybody's a leader. I look at a leader as somebody who is leading a small group or a small team of people. They're leading them. They're providing direction. They're providing vision. And you could argue, that anybody's doing that. But I look at that and go, no, not everybody's a leader. Some people just love being a doer. In fact, I met somebody recently who quit their job because somebody tried to force them into leadership and they didn't want to. They said, right, I'm here to serve. I have the gift of helps. I have the gift of service. Don't put me in front of people. Don't make me lead people, And so that's sort of the way I look at it. Now, I love the way Jesus defines leader. I think he defines it differently than many of us do. And Jesus didn't have a definition of leader, but he gave descriptions that enable us to put a definition together. And so he called his 12, he called them disciples, which is learner. He called them apostles, which are culture shapers. And then he called them slave, and which is a servant. And so you put those three things together, and to me, that's the makeup of a leader. It's somebody who's continually growing, who has the heart of a servant, but God uses them to shape a kingdom culture around them.
So you mentioned discipleship a couple of times. Give me the difference between discipleship and leadership development. Is there a difference?
There's a nuance between the two. So I believe leadership development is discipleship, but there's a nuance difference. And you can see that nuance difference in my story. When that pastor began to disciple me in leadership, I was 27 years old. So from 9 years old when I was saved to 26 years old, at that point, I was being discipled just as a believer. And it was growing my character. It was teaching me to lead myself. It was teaching me how to have intimacy with Jesus, and just trying to learn to live like Jesus. But then when he began to disciple me in leadership, now all of a sudden it wasn't just about character. It was also about competency. It wasn't just about leading myself. It was about leading others. It wasn't just about living like Jesus. It was like leading like Jesus. And so that's the nuance difference. And the church does a decent job with basic discipleship, but they struggle with discipling leaders. And that's why I wrote this book series, because I wanted to put something in the hands of staff and volunteer leaders that would enable them to disciple leaders up the pipeline.
So I love this book series, and I want you to kind of draw a distinction between you've written 3 in the series, I think. One's on leading others, one's on leading leaders, and one is on leading a department. So maybe give me a high level on all 3 of those. Why are those different skill sets, or do I need similar skill sets to lead all 3?
No, they are different skill sets. It's my interpretation of what those skill sets should be. When I work churches through the process, I tell them you can determine this for yourself if you want to, and I give them a list of about 45 competencies to choose from and arrange in order. We have a deck of cards called training cards, and so they can sort those cards and put them in order. Or they can choose, if they go, you've thought it through, Mac, we're just going to go with what you've got, then they'd use the book series. Yeah. But eventually there will be 5 books in this series: Lead Yourself, Lead Others, Lead Leaders, Lead Departments, and then I'm currently writing Leading the Organization. And so that is reflective of the different levels of the leadership pipeline. And every time you go up to new levels of the pipeline, you have to learn new skills. And so what I've done is I've identified the skills at each level that seem to be most common at those levels. and say, okay, here are the ones you need to learn when you're learning, when you're stepping into the leadership and just leading others. Here are some, when you begin to not lead a team or a group, you're actually leading a small team of leaders. Here are the competencies needed for that. And so they just go progressively up the pipeline. Because what happens if somebody skips the levels of the pipeline, it undermines their development and their core competencies that they don't have because they skipped levels. And we see this in churches all the time. A church will take a really good leader, and honestly, most of them haven't been developed, but they'll take a really good leader in their church, and all of a sudden they put them on staff, and they're skipping levels and they're not training them. And then they wonder, why is this person struggling to lead? It's because we haven't developed them at the appropriate levels.
Man, that's such a good point. I'm a checklist guy. I like to knock things off my list. And I agree with you. If I skip from 1 to 5, I'm skipping some very important things, could be. And so I totally agree with that. I love the pipeline and how we don't need to skip any steps. Okay, let's talk about culture. Because this is a thread that kind of goes through all of these. So why is it? Why is culture so important? Why is culture different than or why is it important to talk culture, not building leaders?
Yeah, because what I've discovered is most staff members that I interact with and pastors I interact with, they're just looking for a warm body to put in a leadership position. And so what happens is that they lose a leader and they're looking around their congregation and they're going, he's not ready, she's not ready, he's not, there's somebody that's ready. And they grab somebody and they put them in that leadership spot. And then they go, hey, I just developed a leader. Well, no, they didn't. That's leadership placement, not leadership development. And the American church has diverted back to leadership placement versus leadership development. This is why we have a leadership shortage, because we started doing leadership placement instead of leadership development. And what's happened, it's happened over such a long period of time that now we have a deficiency in our leadership pipelines. And the reason we have a deficiency in our pipelines is we didn't build a culture of leadership development yesterday. And so if we don't begin to build a culture, just a culture is the way we do things. So, what I try to help churches with, hey, we disciple leaders. That's what we do. It's just what we do. It's our culture, part of our culture. We disciple leaders. Well, if we could begin to build a culture of leadership development today, we won't have a shortage in our pipelines tomorrow. But if we keep just doing leadership placement and looking for readiness versus willingness, we're going to have a shortage in our leadership pipelines tomorrow.
So we should be after willingness and then walking them through step by step of the pipeline, not necessarily readiness.
Right. When Jesus approached Matthew was sitting at a tax collector's booth collecting taxes.
Right. Wasn't ready.
Well, he wasn't ready, but there was something. Jesus had lived in Capernaum 3 months at that point. So Matthew heard what was going on. He saw what was going on. There was an intrigue about Jesus, and Jesus knew that enough that he could walk up to him and say, hey, come follow me. I'm going to invite you into something. You're not ready. And he wasn't an apostle right away. He went into training as a disciple first. And this is something that many people miss. In Luke 6, Jesus went up on a mountain. He prayed. The Greek word prayed throughout the night means to pray without ceasing throughout the night. It's the only time that word's used. And so Jesus literally prayed without going to sleep all night long, talking to God about, who do you want me to select as my disciples? It was the height of his popularity. And so it says the next morning he went down from the mountain and he called his disciples to himself. How many? We don't know. Could have been hundreds. And from among them, he chose 12. Well, the night before he was praying and he was wrestling through, God, who do you want me to choose? Who do you want me to pour into the most? And man, if we could pick that model. So that was Luke 6. And Luke 6, over the next 6 months, Jesus did intense training with them. Well, I don't have time to go into all that, but then it's in Luke 9, he sends them out 2 by 2. And it's in Luke 9, it says, and he gave them authority and power.
So there were 6 months from the time he selected them in leadership in Luke 6, and then when he gave them authority and power. 6 months of training happened in between that time. Not just any training. If you look at what he did, it was intense training.
Good. Talk to me about the structure. Why does the structure of my team matter?
Yeah. So when I go into churches, it's one of the very first things we address is I take each department, children, students, groups, worship, and it doesn't matter the size of the church. Even in small churches, I make them put their org chart up for each ministry on a giant Post-it. Then we take all 6 or 7 of those Post-its, we put them up next to each other, and I say, now what you're looking at is an internal X-ray of your structure. And I step back and I say, act like an organizational chiropractor, and you tell me what's wrong with it. They see it every time. And they'll go, oh my goodness, we're using different structures. We're not aligned. We're using different language for what we call things. People don't know who reports to who. And almost every time it's like, okay, wow, I've got like 40 leaders or 40 team members that report directly to me. I can't care for all those people. And so structure enables those who are at that director level to lead as a visionary leader versus a doer. And most staff members that I interact with, their focus is survival, not multiplication. They're just trying to survive week to week to week. And many times it's because their structure's unhealthy and there's an unhealthy amount of weight on their shoulders. So I always point them back to Luke 6. At the height of his popularity, Jesus was in great demand. What did he do? He selected 12 men just a few men that he would spend a disproportionate amount of time with in order to impact the many. He put a layer in there to protect himself, to lead through people so that he could accomplish all that he wanted to accomplish. That's just wisdom.
So I had a leader in college that used to say something similar, that more time with less people yields greater results. And I believe that and that was modeled by Jesus that you just walked out.
Now, here's the key, though. Here's a mistake so many people make. So a lot of staff members, they'll put like coaches in underneath them, but they give them administrative responsibility versus spiritual responsibility. Spiritual leadership responsibility. And so they'll look at, oh man, I need that layer there between me and some of the leaders. And so I'm going to get so-and-so to do the scheduling and do the cleanup and show up early and put things away and send out communication. No. Give them spiritual leadership. Give them actual leadership over a small team of leaders. And you lead them the way you want them to lead their leaders. So do for them what you expect from them, because what I model for them is what they're going to do. And so many people go, that coaching level doesn't work. You're right. It doesn't work when you do it wrong. But it's the disciplined execution of any system. It's the disciplined execution that makes it excellent. And most people just don't execute with discipline.
How does that work with, and we're seeing this at 1230 Media, where a lot of churches are coming to us, and we're a freelance option for them, a creative agency outside of their internal team. And that I'm seeing that more and more, that obviously churches everybody's not in-house. They could either be remote working full-time, or they're using an agency like us, things like that their team is kind of spread out a little bit more. So how does that framework structure work within that? Is there anything that I need to do differently if I use an outside source, if I use contractors, things like that? How do I need to mold based on that?
Yeah, typically anybody that is an outside contractor, we put them outside the pipeline. I draw a box beside the pipeline squiggle. I draw a box there and say, this is support to the pipeline. So like administrative assistants are support to the pipeline. Elders and deacons are support to the pipeline. Facilities team or the ops team might be support to the leadership pipeline.
Good.
So leadership pipeline that's for positions that you want to identify. Go, hey, this is a pathway we can move people up so that we can have future people ready to reproduce more churches, more campuses. Or for me, for example, I used to look at my team and go, okay, hey, my directors, I'd say, hey, I need to know the 3 people you're developing. Your job is to reproduce yourself. My job is to replace you when you leave. But your job is to reproduce yourself and give me 3 options to choose from. And so I always ask my team, who are your 3? Who are your 3? I need to know that, because, you would never think about not having insurance on your building.
Right.
Because if your building burned down, think of the loss. Right. But yet we don't have that same insurance when we look at our human structure and go, okay, hey, I got a great worship director. I got a great kids director. Well, if they're developing 2 to 3 people under them, it provides me insurance that protects me from what I call the transition dip. Transition dip is when I lose a director and the quality and quantity of ministry goes down for a season, because there's nobody there to just step right in.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean I have to hire one of those 3. You still hire from the outside, but those 3 can combine, or 1 or 2 of them could work for a while to carry things at the same quality and quantity.
And do you think that is, you talked about survival mode earlier, and I think if I don't have that insurance, then I'm going to be in survival mode constantly. Like if I'm constantly worried about, oh, if I lose this person, then I'm sunk, or that. So I'm constantly like trying to survive.
And churches will have, I hear this all the time too. They'll have a handful of people who are in 4 to 5 different ministries, and they're rock stars. And if that family moves, one of those families, they're in trouble. It'll decimate a ministry.
All right. So talk to me about onboarding leaders. What does kind of the beginning stages of the pipeline look like?
Yeah. So when I'm working with a church, first thing we do is we identify their structure. So how many levels they have, what they're going to call those levels. Once we have that defined, now we can move to the onboarding system. In the onboarding system, we begin to say, okay, let's think through the step-by-step process that we're going to onboard a new leader. And so we detail that out. And then we say, okay, now, how are we going to train that leader? And I teach a multifaceted approach to training and development. And so we integrate that into that. So, and here's the thing that I really want people to understand is I call the onboarding system, I call it the microfibers of discipleship, because sometimes, a staff member go, oh, I don't want to do this. We don't need that detail of process of how we're going to onboard somebody, and go, yes, you do. Because if somebody raises their hand and says yes to Jesus and yes to kingdom leadership, it's my job to steward that well. And there's so many times somebody will sign a card and say, hey, I'd love to volunteer, or go to the membership class. Hey, I'd love to serve in this area. And nobody follows them up.
Floors me. I'm like, that is like, in your hand, ready to go, a leader that has, a willing leader that's ready to go, ready to serve. Yeah. I mean, you don't have to chase after them. I mean, they're right there for you. All you got to do is call them. Yeah, man, that is, yeah. All right. So say that again.
Yeah, it's just poor stewardship. And
Absolutely.
So when you define that onboarding process, it helps you bring alignment as a staff, how you're going to do it. But boy, it also brings accountability for doing it.
Good point. All right, so let's talk about good spiritual leadership, and maybe let's couch this in. I'm going to go off the beaten trail and ask you an interesting question. So we've both been a part of large churches, multiple campuses, all of the church planning situations. And so I want to ask you, we've seen a lot of, moral failures and things like that over the last 10 or 15 years. Is our model doing that? Is that a correct model? Should we be going more in that direction, even though we've seen some of the, mega churches have some type of fall and then it, crashes and comes back up or whatever. And how does that relate to spiritual leadership? Maybe I'm going too deep on us or too controversial on us, but Go for it.
I wouldn't blame a model.
Okay.
Personally, I think any model can lend itself to its own temptations for leaders. And so, I look at the spiritual leadership and spiritual health of that leader, the spiritual health of that leader, and the spiritual leadership that they provide. There's something new that we're introducing this year called Leadership Accelerator, and Leadership Accelerator. It's a training process where we will teach teams how to use tools to produce spiritual health in their team, but also a team that's spiritually healthy and gets results. It's both relationship and results. And so we've built a set of tools that I say we built them. I've used them for years. And it wasn't until recently I was like, my team members from the past were like, man, I love this and I love this and I love this. And I was like, you know what? Let me package this and let's put a training together and put tools in the hands of leaders so they can have a discipleship impact on those they lead. I'm not necessarily the disciple maker of my team, but I have to have a discipleship influence on my team. So this 8-step process, each step has a tool that you use that helps you maximize the spiritual health of your team, the engagement of your team, and the results of your team. And man, we've been teaching it to some folks, and people are going, wow, you're giving me an intentional system for leading, for spiritual leadership, versus most leaders lead intuitively. And you have to have intuition as a leader. But if I'm always leading from intuition, my team doesn't understand what I'm doing or why I'm doing it all the time. And so they can get frustrated, and then they just sort of sit back and wait for directions. But with this approach, we're saying we're going to help you systematize, and systematize may be too much of a strong word, but we're going to help you put together a process that you utilize that your team can understand. And it's not a restrictive thing. There's a lot of freedoms in it. But now my team says, oh, now I know what he's doing, why he's doing it, where I fit in, and how I can contribute. And it frees them up. It just deepens the level of engagement of your team so much.
So I think you bring up a good point. I want you to speak with that generally too. The being intentional, just intentionality of having a system, being intentional about this is how I'm going to lead this person, as opposed to maybe an organic approach or I'm just going to fill it out. But having a system and being intentional. How important is being intentional to your teachings?
It's absolutely essential. And there are a lot of intuitive natural leaders who would kick back on that and go, no, don't give me a system. They have a system. Right. They may not know what it is. Right. They have a system. They just haven't identified it. Right. And so imagine, when NFL teams prepare for the weekend, or any teams prepare for the weekend, they study their opponent and they script out plays. They're going to be intent. They're not just going to show up and randomly call. So now imagine that they've scripted the plays, but then the quarterback goes under huddle. He calls the play, and then he goes back, and just before he takes the snap, he calls an audible. Why? Because he's reading something on the field. There's intuition in him. I got to change this, and that's good. All right. But if he does that 90% of the time, what's going to happen to the team? They're going, why are we even huddling? They're half effort. What's going on here? I don't know why he's doing what he's doing. Right. And so for a lot of pastors and staff members, that's what I see. They've got people just following them because they're like, I don't know where he's going next, but I'll follow. And it can be very, very frustrating. So that's why I say, hey, you got to have the intentionality, but still the freedom to lead intuitively in the context of that. Yeah, I like that. I like the idea of having a plan so that you can deviate from it. Yeah. And I've used the example of just this podcast. I have a set of questions that I'm going by, but before we start recording, I even told you we could go off road. We could veer because I'm going to hear something I'm going to follow up on or that I'm interested in, but I know exactly where we're coming back to. And I think leaders being intentional with that, or even anything. I mean, how we plan our worship experience. We have a plan, and then if the Holy Spirit says something that we need to take a leading on,
go for it. But we have a plan so that we can easily deviate and come back if we need to.
Whenever I hire somebody new on my team, one of the first things I do, and actually I do a lot of it before I even hire them, I sit down with them, I tell them my strengths, I tell them my weaknesses, and I tell them my leadership system. I say, okay, I have a leadership system that I follow. Here's the leadership system. So when you see me doing these things, you'll know why I'm doing it that way. And you wouldn't believe, people go, oh, wow, that makes sense.
Right. I think you bring up a good point also to tell them that, to show them that, so that they exactly know nothing's hidden. Okay, I know I know exactly where he's going.
Yeah.
Okay. You mentioned sports teams. Let's talk about huddles for a second when it comes to leadership. So what are some tips to make team huddles effective?
Yeah. Okay. So again, people define huddles different ways. And so sometimes huddles are VIP, vision, information, prayer. That's good. When I talk about huddles, I'm talking about development huddles. And so some things to make it good, real simple. Number one, have a focused competency. You want to have a focused competency. Focus on one thing. To make it very interactive. And so what I teach with, when I'm apprenticing somebody, I'm being directive. I still get discussion, but I'm being very directive because they're new. All right. And so I'm apprenticing them or discipling them. So I'm going to be more directive in what I want them to do and giving them instructions. In huddles, I call that peer-to-peer learning. So I don't say a lot. I just ask the question and try to facilitate learning in that environment, generate a lot of good discussion. Third is use an agenda, again, the same agenda again and again. And so mine is, okay, we're going to connect for a few minutes. We're going to celebrate what's God been doing recently in your life for a few minutes. Coach, let's watch this short video. And then we're going to have, 5 or 6 good questions that we're going to talk it through, and let's learn from each other. And then communicate, hey, what did we take away today? And here's some other things that communication you might need to be aware of. And then fifth is care. How can we pray for each other? And so I've used that little agenda for, 30 years now in the huddle trainings I use. And
they all start with C, so it's got to be effective.
It's got to be effective.
All right. So in our few last minutes remaining, I want to ask you about asking questions. And you've talked about this a lot, that it's a leadership style that we should definitely embrace. And that is to lean into asking more questions instead of giving more answers. So what are the benefits of that? What are the benefits of asking more questions as a leader?
Yeah. So when you ask questions, especially good questions, the brain begins to really process. It forces a focus. And so when I ask a question, they have to, the brain can't help it. It begins to focus on that one thing and search for an answer. And so that's why I want to ask questions that are challenging, thought-provoking, because it grabs their attention and it forces those neurological connections to begin to happen. Now, when I ask questions, my goal is not discussion. My goal is discovery. And so I want to ask a follow-up question. I lead with my curiosity because I want them to have a discovery, because if they discover it, they own it. If I hand it to them, they might drop it, lose it, and they don't own it. And there was a young man, I was doing a cohort training some church planters, and we were all standing against a Post-it looking at something, and I asked him a question, I asked him another question, asked him another question, asked him another question. He went, I don't know, just tell me. And I said, no, I can't. You are so close to discovering yourself. I would be pickpocketing you. I would be robbing you of the opportunity to learn right now. You've got this. You just need to think a little harder. And I just kept pushing him until he went, boom. And you see the lights come on. And the joy of discovery. This is what hurts us as leaders. We get so excited about what we've discovered that we want to excitingly share it. Instead of let them.
And I may not share your same excitement.
Yeah.
Unless I discover it for myself.
Unless I discover. Howard Hendricks. I took every class I could from Howard Hendricks at DTS. And he would give us an assignment, study Nehemiah 1, bring your observations. And we'd come in and he said, well, gentlemen, what did you see? And we'd raise our hand, we'd give an observation, and he'd go, oh my goodness, that's fantastic. And he'd get so excited about what we discovered. That's not the first time he heard that insight. He'd been teaching it for years, but he got excited about our discoveries. And that's what I want to do.
Right.
Because when I get enthusiastic about somebody's learning, it reinforces their confidence to think for themselves. If I'm always giving answers, I'm training them to be constantly dependent on me versus teaching them how to think for themselves.
Good. All right. So bring this together as it applies to making Sunday happen. So we're talking to worship leaders, we're talking to pastors, tech leaders that are leading volunteer teams, all about how to plan, craft, create, execute the worship experience on Sunday. So how does all this material about leading bring that into the worship experience for me and using that to build teams to make Sunday happen?
Yeah. Okay. Love that. I'm going to preface it with this. So in the Discipling Leaders series, teaches people how to lead. But what I tell churches is when you're doing leadership development in the church, most churches, you're just teaching people to turn our ministry widget, right? We got to change that. We got to change it. We got to teach people to live a biblical lifestyle of leadership. So these books are geared to teach people how to lead at home, how to lead at work, how to lead in the community. Oh, and by the way, how to lead at church. All right. So now we do want them to learn how to lead at church. So think about your congregation, those who said yes to serving on teams and leading. They're passionate about Christ. They're passionate about your church. You want to release that gifting. You don't want to get in the way and be the doer all the time. You want to release that. And so I want to see, could you imagine walking into a church, and even a big church, where lay leaders are doing most everything? So I went to a church years ago, and I was speaking there at their leadership night on a Sunday night. And so I went Sunday morning, and the worship guy said, hey, why don't you follow me around during the two services? And I said, oh, sure. And now this is a multi-site church that were in two high schools. They got there at 4:30 in the morning, rolled in with semi-tractor trailers, set up two different auditoriums, linked to the technology, right? And it was a big deal. And so this guy's over all that. And he said, just follow me on Sunday. I was floored, Carl. He's walking around drinking his Starbucks coffee. He's introducing me to people. He's calm as can be. He never stepped on stage. After the first service, he said, come watch this. He walks me backstage. 25 people in black shirts get together, and one lady stands up and leads them through a debrief and encourages them, praises them, gets some feedback and all that. And he says, that's our coach. That's our worship coach. And he never said a word, just sat against the wall sipping his coffee. That's all he did all day long. And so what I encourage pastors and worship leaders especially, practice the principle of strategic absence. All right, you know how a worship leader can go on vacation and things go off the tracks that Sunday, Mm-hmm. Well, if you practice strategic absence, you're taking somebody in your leadership pipeline and you're saying, hey, you're running everything this week. I'm going to be here, but I'm a ghost. I'm not here. Okay, pretend I'm not here. I'm going to sit against the back, and I'm going to watch everything from this perspective. And you're leading. Don't come to me. If things go wrong, they go wrong. But I get to see why they go wrong because I'm there, And so that principle of strategic absence, I tell worship leaders, you should be in the back of the auditorium at least once a month, watching worship from that perspective. How can God use you to shape a culture of worship if you're only looking at it from the front? You got to go look at it from the back. You'll see a whole different story. And so that strategic absence allows other people to step up and lead as well.
How do we relate that to our senior leadership, though? Let me give you an example. Here's something that I did, and I want to get your opinion on it. Is I would say to my senior leadership or ask them the priority. Is the priority more that it's perfect, that we hit every button correctly? Or is the priority that we're raising up leaders and that volunteers can run it and that we're shaping and discipling people? or which one is a bigger priority? Okay, if it is actually people, then you got to know that when we're executing on Sunday, unless we're hiring professionals, which is option 1, which we didn't take, right? So if it's option 2, then we got to know that it's going to be 70, 80% accuracy. That's probably what I can guarantee, is it's going to be right 70, 80% of the time, which means there's going to be 20% of the service. The lyric's not going to be right. The lighting cue's going to be off, the whatever. Just know I'm living in that 20% and I'm going after those things so that we can work on that 20%. But we got to know, are we okay with that? Are we okay with that 20%? What do you think about that? Something like that approach?
If you value excellence over the value of development, development will suffer. And you're building a culture on rock stars, only those that do it well. You lose the rock star, you're losing the excellence.
Right.
Unless you can get it hired in real quick. And so I always say, hey, excellence is good, value excellence, but value development over excellence. Because if you don't, it's going to hurt you in the long run, one way or the other.
Yeah, good. All right, got some rapid fire for you. 5 questions before I leave you. You ready?
Okay.
All right, here we go. Number 1, what is one thing that leaders that you've coached think that they are good at, but they're really not?
Vision casting and recruiting.
Interesting. They think that they're pitching the vision, casting the vision well, but the people aren't getting it.
Right.
Wow,
yeah. They mistake their enthusiasm about the vision for people's commitment to the vision.
Good. All right, number 2, what is the most attractive character trait of the leaders that you've coached? What is something common that you see in leaders that really get it?
Likability. Likability is so crucial. I used to tell my kids when they were growing up, I don't care what grade you get as long as you pass. I'd rather you have people skills than smarts. People smarts versus book smarts. So I want you to be good with people, because if you're good with people, you can go as far as you want. And I want you to pass. I want you to give your best effort, but I care more about your people skills than I do your grade card.
Good. Number 3, is there a moment when you cut bait with somebody that you've been trying to lead and move on to someone else? When do you know that it's time to move on to the next person to disciple? Let that person go. Yeah.
I heard John Maxwell say years ago, you can't lead everybody. And I thought, oh, that's crazy. And he's right. There are some people that just won't follow me, won't learn from me. And that's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. It's just there's not that chemistry. There's not the connection. And so we're not, if they're not getting it, they're not developing. And I'm giving my best effort, and they seem to be giving their best effort, but something's not right. Then have an honest discussion about it, and bless them and help them try to find the right connection, and go invest somewhere else.
Good. Number 4, we talked about the game-changing power of questions. What is one type of question I should always be asking to engage my team?
It's good. I call it the fisherman question, fisherman hat question. I have 5 hats, and it's fishing for their point of view. To understand somebody's point of view, if you really fish for it, it's gonna show you an opportunity that they should seize, or an obstacle that's blocking their path. And so I like to ask, okay, why do you say that? Why do you think that? Hey, share with me your reasoning behind doing that. And that's just one type of question, but that point of view question can surface for me an obstacle or opportunity. And I'll throw 2. Another one of my favorites is, I call it the physician hat. It's a self-assessment question. Hey, tell me how you would grade yourself on that. Red, yellow, green, A, B, C, D, F, scale 1 to 5, where are you at on this? That sort of thing.
Good. All right, last one. Why should I work so hard to empower leaders to multiply themselves? What kind of results have you seen that that works?
Why should I work so hard to empower?
Why do you know? I mean, obviously this is what you do. Why do you know that this works? That I should catch the vision that I need to multiply leaders in my context?
Oh my gosh. One is you're not going to be in your leadership position forever. So leaders who refuse to reproduce themselves, it's one of the most selfish acts they can demonstrate, is that refusal to reproduce themselves. They're basically saying, I only care about my rule, my kingdom, my deal. I don't care what happens after I'm gone.
This job can't happen unless I do it.
Right.
Yeah.
But the second thing I would say is, man, I'm a granddad, you know. There is no greater joy to watch my son being a dad.
Yeah.
To watch my daughter being a mom. That's why we moved back to Charleston, because we want to be around them and help them, but not only help them, but to watch them. I'm so proud of the way my kids parent. And so I have leaders I've developed over the years that I just look and I go, I'm so proud. I'm so proud of this person and that person, this person, how they've reproduced themselves and how God's used them and grown them and what God's doing through them. And yeah, when I was growing up, Jerry West was my hero. I loved playing basketball. But I discovered that coaching basketball was a greater joy than playing basketball, because I got to impact the game, not just from my skills, but to catalyze the skills of 10 guys to impact the outcome of the game. What a joy that is. And so many people never get to be a spiritual granddad or a spiritual great granddad. That's even more remarkable. Carl, I get texts from church planters who say, hey, you don't know me, but one of the trainers that trained me was trained by somebody that you trained.
Yeah, right.
And I go, oh my gosh. And they'll say, thank you for writing that curriculum and things like that. And man, that's such a joy that so many people don't get to experience.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Well, tell us how we can, obviously you have several books. Tell us if a church is looking for help in this area, how can they find you? How can they get started with your courses and your program?
Yeah, multiplygroup.org. And what I would encourage them to do is book an Explore call. And Explore calls when I'll take 45 minutes, and I do these personally. 45 minutes, I'll get on a call with you. I'll say, what are your leadership pain points? What are your leadership development pain points? And in that 45 minutes, I'm not trying to sell you anything. I'm just saying, what are your pain points? What are you currently doing? And then I try to give you 2 to 3 solutions, actionable things that you can do right away that'll add value to you. And so that you can sign up for that at multiplygroup.org.
Awesome. Mac, thanks so much for the time, man. You've, we've gone through so much material, 4 books worth in such little time. And man, I've known you for a long time and know of your work, and just so grateful for you. Really appreciate it.
It's an honor to be on here today.
Hey guys, I'm hanging out with my friend Steve Dirks. At 12:30, we do ready-made, we do custom media content, we do training, and our team is incredible. We just have a heart to serve ministry and churches. And Steve, I just wanted to talk to you for just a minute and just kind of get your heart on why you serve churches through 12:30. What's your heart behind why and how you serve them?
Yeah, so my heart for serving at 12:30 is I was on a church staff for many years and had a never-ending list of stuff to always complete. And what always took a backside was caring for my team and doing the stuff that would potentially cause the most fruit within my church sphere. And so for me, I have a heart of really coming alongside churches and helping you guys do worship well, but not having to give up doing something that maybe is more practical for you to be doing on the ground at your church. And so one thing that was, hugely beneficial and that has been beneficial for a lot of churches is outsourcing lyric videos, outsourcing bumper videos, content like that takes a lot of time just sitting at a computer doing, that you maybe don't need to be doing, or you could work with someone like me and our team. And so I love coming alongside guys like you at your church, figuring out what do you want to create, how do you want to create it. You get to lay out exactly what the parameters are, what's the ball that we're going to play in, so to speak. You can lay out the football field, and then I get to take that to our team and have us create something that matches what you are looking for, exactly what you need, and hopefully save you time and stress at the same time. So that's what I love doing. That's what I love that I get to do here at 12:30. And if we can ever do that, reach out to us, and I will look forward to meeting you in your church.
Yeah, guys, and I want you to see that. I want you to see that we're not some big company that's way off, somewhere. We're real people. We're real ministry folks that most of us, all of us, came from church world, ministry world. We have a huge heart, like Steve was saying, to serve you and serve churches. And if we can do that, if we can help you with custom, especially, which Steve is the man that really connects you with our team in getting your custom projects in the works and done, feel free to reach out to us, 1230.media/quote. 1230.media/quote will get you started.
The show notes for this episode are available now at makingsundayhappen.com.
Well, thanks, guys. That is it for us this week. Next week on the podcast, I'll welcome John Mark Cole. John Mark is a singer-songwriter and worship leader. We'll be talking about his incredible story and how we can break through spiritual depression. John Mark has gone through a lot in his life. He'll share his story and how his music has come out of his experiences in life, and then how that affects him as a worship leader, and how it can affect other worship leaders as well that might be going through the same thing. So John Mark has a great story that we'll share next week. We'll go out there and create some incredible worship experiences this weekend. Go make Sunday happen. I'll see you next week.
Making Sunday Happen is a production of the ministry of 1230 Media. For show notes, archive episodes, and more free resources for your church, visit makingsundayhappen.com.